Why you're struggling even though you pray. It's a question that keeps you awake. Like and subscribe to join our journey of faith, healing, and discovery. Your story matters and you're not alone. It was 2:47 a.m. when James sat up in bed, his heart pounding, eyes wide open. The silence of the night was loud, so loud. It echoed the questions in his mind. Why am I still struggling? Why does it feel like God isn't listening? He had just finished another tearful prayer, the kind that comes from deep within the soul. He'd prayed about his finances, his broken relationships, his mental exhaustion. He believed in God. He believed in prayer. And yet his life felt like one unanswered cry after another. Sound familiar? You're not alone if you've felt this way. Many of us reach points where we feel like we're doing all the right things, praying, believing, hoping, but still feel stuck in the same cycle. It creates confusion and sometimes even quiet resentment. James wasn't angry at God. He was heartbroken. And if you're reading this, maybe part of you is too. This story is for people like James and like you. People who want to understand why the struggle remains despite the prayer. James was raised to believe prayer changed things. As a boy, he remembered his mother kneeling at the edge of her bed, whispering prayers for everything healing, money for groceries, protection from pain. And somehow, things always worked out. At least that's how it looked from the outside. Now, as a 36-year-old man with a mountain of debt, anxiety that clung to him like a shadow, and a dream that seemed permanently delayed, James wondered where the power of prayer had gone. Was it broken, or was he missing something? On that quiet night, instead of praying again right away, James opened his Bible. Not to a specific verse, he just let it fall open. His eyes landed on Psalm 13. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? That hit home. It was raw, real. He realized even King David, the man after God's own heart, struggled with the silence of God. James suddenly felt a little less alone, a little more human. If even the faithful wrestled with divine delays, maybe he wasn't faithless. Maybe this was part of the journey. This moment began a slow shift in James. Over the coming days, he started asking better questions. Not, why is God silent? But, what is God trying to show me in the silence? He stopped treating prayer like a vending machine and started treating it like a conversation. He noticed the answers weren't always words, they were people. Moments, gut feelings, opportunities disguised as discomfort. He realized that struggle didn't mean punishment. It often meant preparation. So many of us need to hear that. Prayer is powerful, but it isn't a shortcut. It's not always about changing the situation, but often about changing you in the situation. It forces you to grow, reflect, and align. The delay in breakthrough might not be divine ignorance. It might be divine alignment. Maybe God is not punishing you. He's preparing you for something greater than you imagined. Like and subscribe to stay with us on this life-changing journey. Share this if you know someone who needs encouragement today. You never know whose heart you might heal. The days that followed James' late night revelation were not easy. The struggle didn't magically vanish after reading Psalm 13, but something inside him had shifted. It wasn't peace exactly, but a strange kind of strength. He still prayed, but his prayers were different now. Less desperate, more honest. Less demanding, more trusting. That shift didn't change his circumstances overnight, but it started to change him. James began to realize that spiritual growth often comes during what he started calling the silent seasons. These are the moments where nothing seems to move. No doors open, and your prayers feel like whispers into a vast, empty space. But in truth, silence doesn't mean absence. In fact, silence is sometimes the loudest way God speaks. It forces you to confront yourself, to dig deeper into your faith, and to ask the questions that truly matter. In those quiet weeks, James began journaling after every prayer. He didn't write only about what he hoped, for he started writing what he was learning. He wrote things like, God isn't ignoring me. Maybe he's watching how I respond to the wait. Or is my prayer about growth or just relief? Those small insights became personal revelations. He started treating his prayers like seeds, not magic spells. You don't plant a seed and expect fruit the next day. You wait, you water, you trust the process. And sometimes God is using that waiting to build your roots before your breakthrough. Meanwhile, James' job wasn't improving. His relationships were still strained. But something incredible was happening. He was changing. The man who once begged God to fix it was now asking God to form him in the middle of it. The anxiety didn't disappear, but his perspective did, and that made all the difference. He no longer saw struggle as punishment, but as a sign that something deeper was being developed inside him. You may be in your own silent season right now. You've prayed, fasted, believed, but nothing seems to move. Let James' journey remind you that growth often happens underground. You can't see it, but it's happening. God might be stretching your patience, refining your character, or preparing your heart to handle the blessing He's already planned for you. The delay is not denial. It might just be divine timing working in your favor. James began to understand that prayer is not just about asking, it's also about aligning. It's about changing your posture from God, why won't you, to God, what are you teaching me? This mindset doesn't make pain disappear, but it helps you walk through it with purpose. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to rise stronger on the other side. Like and subscribe to be part of this journey of faith and growth. You're not just watching, you're walking this path with us. James was beginning to see a pattern. His prayers weren't ignored, they were being redirected. He once believed that if God didn't say yes, then the answer must be no. But now he was starting to learn that sometimes God says something even more difficult. Not yet. That realization hit him one afternoon while he was talking with his friend Eliza over coffee. Eliza was a single mother who had spent years praying for stability. She'd prayed for a better job, peace at home, even for the pain in her knees to stop. She told James, "I used to think God was punishing me by making me wait. But now I believe he was protecting me from things I wasn't ready for yet." That hit James hard. How many things had he begged for, assuming he was ready when in reality, he was only ready emotionally, not spiritually? He remembered all the job applications he submitted without preparation, the relationships he forced out of fear of being alone, the business plans launched in haste. In hindsight, none of them were truly aligned with his purpose. They were fueled by panic, not peace. And prayer, he now saw, was never meant to fast-track life, but to prepare him for it. That day, James scribbled something bold in his journal. Sometimes God's delays are divine defenses. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Just because something is good doesn't mean it's good for you right now. Like a child asking for the car keys before they know how to drive, God might withhold things not to hurt us, but to save us from a greater hurt. In that same week, James faced another disappointment. A client he had hoped would sign a big contract backed out at the last minute. The old James would have spiral-blamed God, questioned everything. But now, his first thought was, what are you protecting me from this time? It didn't erase the frustration, but it reframed it. And that made all the difference. You see, when we pray, we often want a straight path. We want quick answers and visible results. But real faith grows in the ambiguity and the tension between belief and reality. And often, it's the waiting that deepens your wisdom, strengthens your spirit, and forces you to become the person your future needs you to be. Sometimes the breakthrough isn't the blessing. The becoming is. James still struggled. He still had unpaid bills, unresolved wounds. But now he carried a new kind of faith. One that didn't need constant proof to trust. One that didn't collapse under silence. One that could say, even if I don't see it yet, I believe it's coming. It was a Sunday afternoon when James sat quietly in the back row of a small local church. He wasn't there for the sermon or the music. He was there because his soul was heavy again. Not because things had gotten worse, but because things hadn't changed much at all. He had grown stronger. Yes, wiser, sure. But he was still in the fire, and some days the heat felt unbearable. That S when the preacher said something that hit him like lightning. Faith isn't proven on the mountaintop. It's forged in the fire. Those words wrapped around James' heart. In that moment, he realized that many of us expect comfort from God. But what he often gives us instead is courage, the strength to walk through the flames, not escape them. James looked back on the past few months and saw a version of himself he no longer recognized. He was more patient now. He didn't panic at setbacks like he used to, even started helping others through their struggles, something he never felt qualified to do before. And that S, when he truly understood something important. God was answering his prayer not by changing his life, but by changing him. It's easy to say you believe when things go well, but real belief is built when things go wrong, and you choose to keep praying anyway. That's where the fire does its refining work. Like gold purified under intense heat, our faith sheds impurities in struggle. Fear, ego, pride, control, all burned away so that what's left is something more precious, more powerful, more real. James also began reading stories of people in Scripture who suffered, but not because they lacked faith. Joseph was thrown in a pit and prison before reaching the palace. David ran for his life before he ever wore a crown. Even Jesus endured pain, betrayal, and silence. But through it all, they remained faithful and were never truly alone. He started to see his fire as a place of formation. Each day in the struggle was a lesson in trust. Every prayer not yet answered was a chance to stretch his patience. And each quiet night was a whisper from heaven, "I'm still with you." That realization became James' foundation. You may be walking through your own fire right now. The flames might be financial, emotional, relational, or spiritual. And maybe your prayer feels like a cry no one hears. But listen, faith doesn't mean you'll never hurt. It means you'll never be abandoned in your hurt. Every step you take in the fire builds something stronger within you. The truth is, most people want deliverance. Few are willing to be developed. But God, in his wisdom, often chooses to build you before he blesses you, because who you become in the fire will sustain you long after the fire is gone. James sat at his kitchen table, flipping through his old prayer journals. Dozens of pages filled with hopes, heartbreaks, and repeated phrases like, "Lord, please fix this," and "Why aren't you answering me?" As he read his own handwriting, he realized something hard but freeing. Much of his faith journey had been transactional. He had been approaching God like a divine vending machine. Insert prayer, expect outcome. And when the results didn't come, he felt cheated. But now, after all he had learned in the waiting, in the silence, in the fire, he began to understand something deeper. God is not a system to figure out. He's a relationship to walk with. This realization was humbling. James had believed in God his whole life. But for years he had treated prayer like a business deal. I'll believe, I'll behave, and you bless. But that's not how relationships work. Relationships require trust, patience, intimacy, and present especially when things don't go as planned, especially when you're hurting. James remembered the day he stopped praying for quick fixes and started praying for closeness. Instead of "God, get me out of this," he started praying, "God, stay close to me in this." That one shift changed everything. The pressure to get results disappeared. The performance faded. And in its place grew something far more real. A friendship with God. And with that friendship came another realization. Faith isn't a bargaining tool, it's a bond. A connection that isn't shaken by silence or delays. In fact, those very things deepen the connection if you allow them to. Think of the closest people in your life. They aren't the ones who fix every problem. They're the ones who stay, who listen, who hold space for your pain. That's what James began to feel with God, not just a fixer, but a faithful friend. If you're struggling because your prayers aren't being answered the way you hoped, ask yourself this: am I pursuing an outcome, or am I pursuing God himself? That question is not meant to judge you, but to free you. When your faith becomes a relationship instead of a transaction, everything shifts. You stop waiting for a breakthrough and start walking with the one who will carry you through. James found that his peace grew not when his problems disappeared, but when his view of God changed. He didn't see him as distant or dismissive anymore, as someone who was right there at the table with him. In the quiet, in the struggle, in the learning. So if you're in a season where your prayers feel unanswered, lean into relationship, not results. Talk to God like you would a friend. Cry if you have to. Be honest, be real, because faith doesn't flourish through formulas, it grows through connection. Your delay is not your denial. Like and subscribe for more faith-filled stories that bring hope in the middle of your hardest days. You're not forgotten, you're growing. Keep going. There was a time when James thought a delay from God meant a no. That if things didn't happen quickly, they simply weren't meant to happen. But over the past few months, living inside unanswered prayers and learning through quiet moments, he discovered something powerful. Delay and denial are not the same. One evening, after another job interview fell through, James felt the familiar sting of disappointment. But instead of falling into despair, he walked outside under the night sky and whispered, "Lord, I still trust you." It wasn't a loud, dramatic moment. It was quiet, small even. But it was filled with faith. That night, something inside him clicked. He was no longer chasing immediate answers. He was learning to stand still in divine trust. You see, there's a big difference between what feels like rejection and what is actually redirection. Many times, God is not withholding your dream. He's protecting the timing of your destiny. Imagine receiving something good at the wrong time. It could crush you. But receiving it at the right time, that's divine favor. James began looking at his journey like a seed. A seed doesn't sprout the moment it's planted. It spends time in darkness, unseen, underground, but it's not dead. It's being nurtured, broken open, and prepared to break through. The soil isn't a grave. It's a place of transformation. And so it is with prayer. Just because you haven't seen the result yet, doesn't mean the answer isn't growing beneath the surface. Every day you pray, you're watering that seed. Every time you choose hope over despair, you're strengthening the roots. And one day, when you least expect it, the breakthrough will come not because you forced it, but because you were faithful enough to wait for it. James also reflected on how delays gave him space to mature. If God had answered all his prayers immediately, he might have missed the growth, the learning, the deepening of his character. He wouldn't have learned how to be content with himself. He wouldn't have developed resilience. And he certainly wouldn't have discovered how to comfort others through their own struggles. His delay became his training ground. So, if you're feeling like God has forgotten your prayer pause, look again. What feels like a delay might be your divine setup. Your current situation might not be a punishment, but preparation. God isn't late. He's always on time, but his time is tied to your readiness, not your calendar. James now prays with a new tone, not anxious, but expectant. Because while nothing may have changed outwardly, everything had changed inside of him. His delay became his development. His waiting became his worship. When the blessing looks like brokenness, this journey is helping you see your struggle with new eyes. Your breakthrough may not look the way you expected, but it's coming. Stay with us. James was no stranger to brokenness. He had lost opportunities, endured heartbreaks, and watched dreams slip through his fingers. And yet, strangely, he felt stronger now than ever before. Not because life got easier, but because he stopped viewing brokenness as failure. In fact, the more he grew in his walk with God, the more he began to see that some blessings only come through broken things. One moment stood out clearly. It was the day his small group leader shared the story of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Notice she said that Jesus broke the bread before he multiplied it. That simple truth hit James like thunder. The bread had to be broken before it could feed others. What if just maybe his broken moments weren't the end of his story, but the beginning of something more powerful? He looked back on the lowest moments of his life. Times he had cried alone in his car. Days when rejection emails piled up. Nights when loneliness echoed through his apartment like a haunting song. But in those exact moments, he found something unexpected. Clarity, surrender, dependence on God. And in hindsight, he saw that those seasons shaped him more than any success ever did. You see, some prayers are answered not with gifts, but with growth. And sometimes that growth starts with being broken because in brokenness, your pride crumbles, your ego fades. And what's left is a soul that's real, open, and ready to receive. It's painful, yes, but it's purposeful. God doesn't break to destroy. He breaks to bless. James started seeing his past wounds not as weaknesses, but as wisdom points. Because of what he went through, he could now speak to others who were struggling. He could listen more deeply, encourage more sincerely, pray more powerfully, not because he had it all figured out, but because he'd been there. His brokenness made him relatable. It gave his testimony depth. In your own life, you might feel shattered right now. Like the very thing you prayed to be healed is falling apart instead. But remember, healing sometimes looks like breaking first. Think of a bone that heals incorrectly. It must be broken again to be set right. The breaking isn't cruel, it's corrective. James's story reminds us that blessings don't always look like we expect. They might come wrapped in disappointment, loss, or delay. But if you lean in, you'll find that God uses broken pieces to build something far more beautiful than you imagined. What looks like the end may actually be the beginning of your purpose. The power of surrender. Like and subscribe if you're learning to let go and trust God's bigger picture. Surrender isn't weakness, it's the start of peace. James used to think that faith meant holding on tighter, clenching his fists, repeating affirmations, and pressing harder in prayer until something changed. But now, after everything, he had come to realize that real faith often begins with the opposite: letting go. Letting go of control. Letting go of the timeline. Letting go of the way he thought life had to go. It was in that release that he finally found rest. It wasn't easy at first. Surrender felt like giving up. It felt passive, even lazy. But James learned that true surrender is active trust. It's saying, God, even if you don't fix this the way I hoped, I will still follow you. I will still believe you are good. That kind of trust doesn't come naturally. It's built slowly, through seasons of waiting, testing, and learning to believe that God is still working even when it doesn't look like it. One night, James sat down to pray, but instead of asking for anything, he simply said, God, I surrender this to you. I've carried it too long. I trust you know what to do with it. He felt a strange peace afterward, not because the problem was solved, but because the pressure wasn't solely on him anymore. That is the power of surrender, lifts the weight you were never meant to carry in the first place. Surrender doesn't mean you stop praying or hoping. It means you stop trying to force the outcome. It means you do what you can with what you have, and you leave the rest in God's hands, trusting that His hands are far more capable than yours. It's a mindset shift from striving to abiding. This is where many people struggle. We want to pray and still keep control. We want to trust God, but also keep one hand on the wheel. James had to learn to release that grip, not because God demanded it, but because his soul needed it. He realized that peace is not the absence of problems, it's the presence of trust in the middle of them. Think of a child falling asleep in their parents' arms. The child doesn't have all the answers. They don't need to. They're safe simply because they know who's holding them. That's the kind of trust James was learning to live in. And once he did, his prayers changed. They weren't frantic or panicked anymore. They became quiet conversations filled with honesty and surrender. So if you're holding on tightly right now, gripping your plan, your pain, or your expectations, try letting go. Surrender is not defeat. It's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of peace. James found that God moved more freely in his life when he stepped back and said, "Your will, not mine." One morning, James was sitting at his usual cafe spot, sipping black coffee and journaling, when an elderly man asked to share his table. At first, James hesitated. He was in the middle of writing a prayer, but then he smiled and nodded. What followed was a simple conversation about life, faith, and holding on when everything seems like it's falling apart. James almost laughed. This man had unknowingly echoed his very thoughts. And in that moment, James realized something profound. God often answers through people. We tend to expect divine solutions to come through dreams, signs, or miraculous events. But sometimes God's reply comes through the words of a stranger, the kindness of a friend, or the quiet presence of someone who simply listens. James had prayed for peace, and it came through the wisdom of a man he didn't even know 20 minutes earlier. From that day on, James became more open, not just in prayer, but with people. He started reaching out again, reconnecting with old friends, talking honestly in his small group, and even volunteering at a shelter on weekends. What amazed him was how often his own healing came through helping others. Every smile he shared, every shoulder he offered, every prayer he whispered for someone else, somehow watered his own dry soul. You see, many people struggle even though they pray because they're doing it in isolation. But God never intended for us to carry our faith alone. Even Jesus surrounded himself with people, imperfect, fragile, human people, because relationships are part of God's design for healing. Sometimes your breakthrough doesn't come through personal revelation, but through community. James once believed that showing struggle was a sign of spiritual weakness. Hey, now he knew the truth. Hiding your pain keeps you from your help. Opening up allows others to be the answer you've been praying for. And just as importantly, it allows you to become someone else's answer too. If you've been asking, why am I still struggling even though I pray? Consider this. Maybe the answer has been trying to reach you through someone else. Maybe the text you ignored, the invitation you declined, or the conversation you cut short was God knocking gently through another human heart. James learned to see people differently. Every person became a possible messenger. Every interaction a potential miracle. And that mindset shifted everything. He no longer waited passively for divine intervention. He walked actively, eyes open, heart soft, ready to receive and ready to give. So look around. Who's trying to reach you? Who has God placed in your life as a vessel of grace? And more importantly, who are you meant to reach? The answer was in you all along. This series has helped you see your struggle in a new light. Share your journey in the comments. We grow stronger together. The morning light poured through James's window as he sat in stillness. There was no anxiety, no racing thoughts, no urgent prayer requests. Just quiet. Peaceful. Whole. It had been almost a year since that sleepless night when he cried out, asking why he was still struggling despite all his prayers. And now, in this moment of reflection, James understood the answer. God never left. He was leading him the whole time. The breakthrough hadn't come as a single event. It wasn't one answered prayer or one lucky break. It was a series of inner awakenings, each one more freeing than the last. What James had once seen as silence, he now saw as strategy. What felt like delays were actually divine lessons. And what he thought were setbacks had shaped him into someone more grounded, grateful, and deeply alive. He realized that his struggle didn't mean his faith was broken. It meant his faith was real, tested, refined, strengthened. He had learned to stop chasing blessings and start living in trust. He didn't need everything to be perfect to feel peace. Circumstances hadn't radically changed, but he had. And that made all the difference. The truth is, many people struggle because they believe prayer should change everything around them. But what prayer often changes is you. It softens your heart. It aligns your vision. It roots you in something deeper than circumstances' hope. James no longer feared struggle. He respected it, because struggle taught him who he really was, and more importantly, who God really is. Looking back, James could now see that the answer to his question, Why am I struggling even though I pray? Was never about whether God heard him. It was about whether he was willing to grow through the waiting. And he did, day by day, lesson by lesson, tear by tear. And you may still be in your season of waiting, wrestling, or wondering. But don't give up. Don't think God has forgotten you. Every prayer you've whispered, every tear you've cried, every time you've held on when it made no sense it all matters. You are being shaped, strengthened, set apart. Maybe you haven't received the answer yet because you are the answer to someone else's prayer, to your own healing, to the future you were born to build. You just needed to become the version of yourself who could walk in that truth with boldness and peace. So keep praying, keep trusting, keep showing up to life with faith. Because the story isn't over and the struggle isn't a sign you've failed. It's proof that you're becoming everything you were created to be. Thank you for walking through this 10-part journey. If this story blessed you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Your voice might be the encouragement someone else needs today.